Assalamu alaikum. We will begin with lecture 20 today, and I will look at the other two poems by Alfred Tennyson with you. In the previous lecture, I discussed the two poems with you by Alfred Tennyson, and you saw how various themes that Tennyson normally uses in his poems, they were employed in those poems. And those poems were Break, Break, Break and Tears, Idle Tears. Both of the poems shared slightly similar concepts and ideas and themes that are quite common with Tennyson. That was why I took them together in one lecture. And also because the language that Tennyson uses in his poems is simple, although the meaning is complicated by the paradoxes, by the complications that arise from the mixing up of images in the poem. Still, the reader is able to understand the meaning behind the poem. That is why even in today's lecture, I'm going to take two of Tennyson's poems together, and we're going to look at those two poems in today's lecture, and we shall see how, as I told you in the previous lecture, that Tennyson is known for the variety of themes and styles that he uses in his poetry, and he's known even to touch upon the political and the political themes, and also topics which were national and which touched upon the British idea of sovereignty and British concept of nationhood. So we shall see how Tennyson comes across as a religious poet and how he comes across as a national poet in today's lecture. I will begin the lecture with his poem with the title Saint Agnes Eve, and after Saint Agnes Eve I'm going to look at the Lotus Eaters with you. So these are the two poems that we are going to analyze in today's lecture. Number one is Saint Agnes Eve, and number two is the Lotus Eaters. Saint Agnes Eve is not a long poem. It's a short poem. If you have the text before you, you can see that the poem is divided into uneven stanzas. The sentences are short, and the rhyme scheme is not regular. The diction and the language that Tennyson uses is simple. So he is, the style is the same. It's not different from his other works. And you shall see that he employs images again in his poem, lots of images, and he uses those images to put across his emotions and feelings to you. Now this particular poem, Saint Agnes Eve, has a background, and it has a religious background. And before I get to the text of the poem, it is important that you know the background to this poem. Saint Agnes, the name, the title of the poem itself should tell you that it is about some saint. ST, wherever it is written, it stands for Saint, S-A-I-N-T. So this particular woman, Agnes, she attained this sainthood, or she attained the status of a saint after she was supposedly martyred, killed, burned, or hanged by the Christians of those times, in the Roman times. And so since then, her date of birth has been celebrated as the Saint Agnes Day. Tennyson also chooses this occasion to write about it in order to express the girl's desire and love for reunion with the Lord, with God. It is a very different poem from his other poems, because he will appear to be very religious here, and he is able to express that girl's sentiments and emotions in a very thorough manner. So this Saint Agnes Eve, it is celebrated every year on the 21st of January. And it was believed that this the event actually happened on the year 304 AD, that is 304 after the death of Christ. And she was a 13-year-old Christian girl, Agnes of Rome. She was martyred when she refused to sacrifice to the pagan gods and lose her virginity by rape. These were the times when Romans, although occupied most of the southern Europe and parts of northern Africa, but they had not as yet conquered this island, the United Kingdoms. They had not come to the British Isles, and as a result, in fact, even most other parts of the European countries, they were still pagan believers. They were still those who adhered to worshipping of the pagan gods and goddesses, and the practices of offering sacrifices to those gods and goddesses were still very common in those times. So, and in most places there was a mixture of myth and the new Christian religion that was adopted. So there was a lot of confusion around about that time. So this was a girl who had changed her faith. She was Christian, and it was a custom in her time that young girls were offered as a sacrifice to the pagan gods. They were first raped, and then they were, and that was how they were sacrificed for the god, for their pagan god or goddesses. This girl refused, and as a result of her refusal, she was either beheaded or burned or stabbed. So it's not clear what happened to her, because the account has come down to us through another saint of Christianity. So he has recounted this tale of Agnes in one of his books. And she was buried beside Via Nomentata, another saint in Rome. And she refused to surrender her virginity because she claimed that Christ was her only husband. So she was a woman who had decided not to marry any mortal man. She had given up her life for the sake of Christ. And it is a common practice in Christian religion, those women who decide not to marry, who decide to give up their lives for their Lord, for Jesus Christ, and they do not marry all their lives, and they live away from society, and they are called nuns. They live in their own special places called nunneries. They run their own churches, and they completely devote themselves to their Lord, who is Jesus Christ. So she was one of those nuns, and she had decided that her soul was meant for Jesus Christ only. So it is a purely religious poem celebrating a Christian dogma. This girl, after she was martyred, after she became a martyr, she became the patron saint of all the virgins, because she lost her life in trying to keep her virginity. She became the patron saint of virgins, of betrothed couples, and chastity in general. So chastity, virginity, purity, all of that was linked to Saint Agnes. And iconographers almost always represent her with a lamb, which signifies her virginity. And in most of the pictures she's shown carrying a lamb, as lamb is a symbol of purity. And in her case it also signifies virginity and purity. The lamb as a symbol of purity is one of the symbols of Saint Agnes. In Rome on this day, the Holy Father will bless 2 crowned lambs brought to the church of Saint Agnes in 2 baskets, decorated in red, signifying martyrdom, and white, signifying purity, by Trappists of the Fontaine Monastery. So even to this day, the day is celebrated, and it is celebrated in this manner, as I've just read out for you. Two lambs, one bathed in red color, the other pure white, brought to the Holy Father, who then blesses them, and then they are reared up and sent back to the this nunnery. So, and the red color signifying the martyrdom of Saint Agnes, and the white signifying her purity. The eve of a feast day, which is January the 20th, it became in European folklore a day when girls could practice certain divinatory rituals before they went to bed in order to see their future husbands in their dreams. Now, out of this tale emerged certain myths, and all over Europe, the Christian girls, those who intended to celebrate this day on January 20th, they would practice certain divine rites and rituals before going to bed, with the belief that in their dreams they are going to see their future husband. So she became the voice, and she became the soul of the virgins all over the world. She's a symbol of virginity, in fact, all over the world. And of all the works, artistic or literary, that use the subject of St. Agnes's Eve as its basis, John Keats's narrative poem, The Eve of St. Agnes, written in 1819, is undoubtedly the most famous. Although Tennyson have written this poem on St. Agnes, but Keats before him also wrote on St. Agnes, but the title is slightly different. The title of his poem was The Eve of St. Agnes, The Eve of St. Agnes. And his poem is most celebrated, it's most famous, and it's most renowned. But whereas Keats exonerates the classical myth rather than the Christian myth, Tennyson in his poem relies heavily on the Christian account of the story and not the classical myth. So there is this difference in the two poems. And Tennyson first published this work under the name St. Agnes, but in 1857 he changed the title to St. Agnes's Eve, and the change in name took place due to the influence of Keats's poem. Tennyson wanted to bring it close to Keats's poem, although one is essentially a celebration of physical love, that is Keats's St. Agnes, but Tennyson's poem is a celebration of spiritual love. So that is the basic difference between the two, where Tennyson celebrates spiritual love and union between this girl St. Agnes and Jesus Christ. Keats celebrates a physical union between a lover, a mythical, classical a goddess and a god. Let us now look at the text of the poem and see how the religious and the spiritual sentiments are expressed. The very first few lines, they describe to you the setting of the poem. They tell you that the setting is religious, that the setting is a convent. And Tennyson says, deep on the convent roof, the snows are sparkling to the moon. My breath to heaven like vapor goes, may my soul follow soon. He says, deep on the convent roof. So he introduces to you this scene of a lonely convent standing in the night, but it is shining because the roof is all covered in snow, and the snow is sparkling under the full moonlight. So the convent is very much visible even at night time. So just to remind you, this eve is celebrated on 20th of January, and snows start falling in Europe from after the Christmas Eve, that is the 25th of December. So it's hardly a month away from the Christmas Eve. So the whole area is still covered with heavy snow. So on this convent roof, which is the place where the nuns live, the convent is a place of living for the nuns next to the church. So Tennyson describes to us this quiet convent whose rooftop is covered with snow, glistening, sparkling snow under the moonlight. My breath to heaven like vapor goes, may my soul follow soon. Look at the prayer in the last line. Saint Agnes, it is Saint Agnes speaking, it's not Tennyson, it's Saint Agnes. She says, my breath to heaven like vapor goes. So she says that my breath is going to heaven. She is looking up to heavens on this serene, beautiful night. Her thoughts are filled up with her beloved, who is Jesus Christ. She has no time for anyone else. So she says that her breath, she's praying at the time, and when she prays, her breath is taken to the heaven. Her face is turned towards heaven. She's looking up at her Lord, and she's praying fervently, and she can see her breath rising like vapor. And you know that in really cold climate, our breath tends to condense, and we can even see it. So that is why she's comparing it to vapors. And then her prayer is, may my soul follow soon. She says, I can see my breath being taken to the heavens, but she wishes, she prays that her soul may also reach the heavens, and she may be united with her beloved, that is Jesus Christ. Then she says, the shadows of the convent towers slant down the snowy sward, still creeping with the creeping hours that lead me to my Lord. She says, the shadows of the convent towers slant down the snow. She gives us further, Tennyson gives us further description of this convent. He says, in this calm and peaceful moonlight, the convent towers, the shadows of the convent towers can be seen on the ground, and they slant down the snowy sward. They cover all the snowy land, all the snowy ground, still creeping with the creeping hours. So this, as the time passes, the shadows are also either lessening or shortening. Because the moon is also not static in the sky, it's also moving. It starts in the west and it sets in the east. So as it moves, the shadow also change their shadows change their direction, and they also lengthen with the movement of the moon. So he says that Tennyson tells us that the time was passing in this peaceful, calm moonlight, lit by moonlight and the sparkling, glowing white snow. The time passes by that lead me to my Lord. But Saint Agnes's feeling is that with every passing time, she is brought closer and closer to her Lord, to Jesus Christ. So everything in nature, everything in life has only one meaning for her, and that is her love for Jesus Christ. Then comes her prayer. She says, make thou my spirit pure and clear, as are the frosty skies, or this first snowdrop of the year that in my bosom lies. Her prayer is, she says, make thou my spirit pure and clear. Now she's asking the Lord to make her spirit pure and clear. She can see the white snow all around her. She can see the purity of the snow, and she's using that image to ask for her own purity, he says, and the purity of her soul. She wants the purity of her soul. And then there we have a simile. She says, as are the frosty skies. She wants her soul to be as clear and pure as the frosty skies above. In the winter season, the skies are also lit up clearly, and they're clear, they're very visible. And when it's not even full moonlight, we can see all the stars glistening in the sky. So he says, I want my spirit to be as pure and clear as the crystal clear sky above, or this first snow, or I want it to be pure like the first snowdrop of the year, which is not polluted, which is not corrupted by anything in nature. So you say she's standing outside and she's looking up into the heavens and she's praying, and snow is falling, and as the fresh snow falls on her, she says the snow that she carries in her with her, she wants to be as pure as that snow which has not been corrupted, polluted by the ground, which has not been trodden over, and which is as clear and pure as white. Then in this next stanza, which is a longer one, she will make further, Tennyson will offer us more images and will show how St. Agnes's imploring becomes more intense. He says, as these white robes are soiled and dark to yonder shining ground, as this pale taper's earthly spark to yonder argent round. Now she's still comparing. She says, my soul is impure, make my soul pure. This was her prayer in the last few lines above. But now she says, as these white robes are soiled and dark, she's talking about her own clothes. Robes means clothes. She says, as my white clothes are soiled. Soil means dirty, and dark because they are maybe unclean. But darkness here suggests sinfulness. She says, I am unclean, I am sinful, and my robes are dirty and dark as compared to this shining ground. The ground is shiny because it is all covered with white, pure snow, and this moonlight is reflected. That is why it is shiny. And then he makes another comparison. He says, as this pale taper's earthly spark to yonder argent round. Just now she talked about the shining ground which reflected the moonlight, and now she says that even this reflection of moonlight by the earth, this is pale. It is pale, he says, in comparison to the argent round. The argent round is the moon in the sky, the full shining moon in the sky. So she says this earth's reflection of light, or the earth's light, is pale as compared to the light, the luminous light of the moon in the skies, the argent round, the moon in the sky. So once again she's comparing her own soul, which is like the pale earthly spark, and that of the Jesus Christ is like the round luminous moon. So shows my soul before the Lamb. So she spells it out. She says, thus is like my soul is like before the Lamb. The Lamb is, I've told you just now that the Lamb is also associated with Saint Agnes. In all the pictures that have been drawn of Saint Agnes, she's been shown carrying the Lamb. The Lamb is a symbol of purity and her virginity, but the Lamb is also a symbol of Jesus Christ, who's pure and who is innocent. So he says, so shows my soul before the Lamb. That is why it is written with capital L. My spirit before thee. He says, my soul before you is like this earthly, pale earthly spark in front of the moon, or as she says, my clothes, dirty clothes in front of this shining ground. So she says that such is a state of my soul and my spirit before you. So in mine earthly house I am, to that I hope to be. Earthly house is this body, this framework. She says, I am still in my body, my soul is still trapped inside my body. My soul is still trapped inside the body in this earthly house. She detests it. That is why she calls it the earthly house. She is not happy. He says, I'm trapped here. I long to be free. My soul, my spirit longs to be free and be united with you, my Lord. And she says, I hope to be united with you, O Lord. Break up the heavens, O Lord, and far through all yon starlight keen, draw me, thy bride, a glittering star, in raiment white and clean. Now she makes a further emphatic prayer, a truly emphatic prayer. She says, break up the heavens, O Lord. Now she wants her prayers to be heard. She wants her soul to be freed of this earthly framework, and she wants her soul to be carried over to the heavens above. She says, I want the heavens to break up. I want the heavens to divide and show a passage, and far through all yon starlight keen, draw me, thy bride, a glittering star. She uses two metaphors here for herself. First, she calls herself the bride. She is the bride, and her bridegroom is Jesus Christ. So she is she's taking herself as a bride of Jesus Christ, and she wants to be reunited and united with her bridegroom. He says, break open the doors of heavens, and so that I can see with the help of the starlight, and draw me, take me. I'm your bride, and I'm a glittering star, and I'm a shining star in raiment white and clean, and I have now been cleansed. I'm wearing clothes which are white and are clean, so I am pure. I am a virgin. I have not lost my virginity. This is the tribute that Tennyson is paying to Saint Agnes. She had accepted death over the loss of her virginity. So she has been accepted by Jesus Christ because she gave up her life for the sake of her virginity, because she had promised herself to the Lord Jesus Christ. And then the next stanza, she is in another state of ecstasy. She says, he lifts me to the golden doors. You see how gradually Tennyson has taken you along. He first described to you the scene, the peaceful, beautiful, moonlit scene, and then in the next stanza he told you how she implores and seeks a purity, and then with the help of her virginity, she says that the doors to the heavens will open, and her prayers will be heard. And now in third stanza we see that her prayers are actually heard, and she says, he lifts me to the golden doors. These are the golden doors of the heaven. The flashes come and go. She can see the doors being opened and she being lifted by her bridegroom. All heaven bursts her starry flows and strews her lights below. And she's walking on the floors of heaven, which is made up of stars. This is why Tennyson describes it as a starry floors, because now she's no more on the earth. She's been lifted up by her bridegroom to the heavens, and she's in the heavenly, she's crossed the heavenly doors, and she's having visions of that beautiful place, and she is walking on the starry floor of the heavens and strews her lights below. Those stars are giving their light to the earth below. She is walking upon those stars, and deepens on and up. The gates roll back, and far within, for me, the heavenly bridegroom waits to make me pure of sin. And she says, and deepens on and up. Her vision becomes clearer and clearer. The gates roll back. She goes deeper and deeper. The gates finally open. They roll back, and far within, she says, the heavenly bridegroom waits to make me pure of sin. So when she's united with her bridegroom, when she's united with Jesus Christ, she says, only then will she be made totally pure. although she's pure by now. So she's finally united with her bridegroom, with the Jesus Christ, and this is the fruit of a sacrifice. Tennyson still tells us that the Sabbaths of eternity, one Sabbath deep and wide, a light upon the shining sea, the bridegroom with his bride. So these are just typical of Tennyson, when in the last few lines he sort of harmonizes everything. He says the Sabbaths of eternity, one Sabbath deep and wide. Sabbaths are the weekly days, a day of rest or worship in a week, like the Jews celebrated Saturday as the Sabbath day, and for Christians it was a different day, and for Muslims also not totally alike, but like Friday is considered as a day of worship and rest by Muslims in most of the countries. So what he's saying is that for her there's rest for all times now, for eternity, one Sabbath deep and wide. So he says this is, she's drunk, she will drink from eternity. She will have all the rest that she wanted. A light upon the shining sea. She's like a light upon the shining sea. She is part of one shining sea, that is the Jesus Christ, the bridegroom with his bride. So he is envisioning the bridegroom united eventually with his bride. With this we come to the end of the text, and you've seen how with simple language but with lots of images, Tennyson has put across the emotions and feelings that were felt by this young girl of 13 years of age, Agnes, and her desire to stay pure and virgin and to be united with her beloved, for whose sake she had kept her virginity. So let's just take a brief look at some of the themes. The poem celebrates Agnes's purity and martyrdom, and it shows her place with the one she loves. This is clearly the most ominous and the most explicit theme of the poem. It is a celebration of her purity and her martyrdom, and it shows her place with the one she loves. So she attained her desire, she fulfilled her desire, she attained the status that she wanted. In the true spirit of the Virgin Mary, she remained a virgin and obtained martyrdom to protect her virginity. And so this is why she's a saint, she's a true Christian. She followed this in the footsteps of Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus Christ, and she remained a virgin. She remained a pure nun. This is a deeply religious poem, it resonating with deep expressions of love and humility for God. The poem exhibits love for the Lord, for Jesus Christ, but it also exhibits humility for the girl to first seek forgiveness for her sins and to seek the purification of her sins, the purification of her soul and spirit for her sins. This shows her humility. Before she can be united with her Lord, she knows that she has to be purified, she has to be utmost clean. And although her martyrdom should suffice, it should make her pure and clear of any stain or sin, but still she's humble and she seeks the Lord to first to purify her and then to make her his own. And Tennyson offers complex images to show the passion of the nun for the union with her Lord. So these were the themes of the poem, and as you can see, the poem was simple and it concentrated on a historical event, and the theme is extremely religious and Christian. In that it extols the virtue of a true nun, and it extols the concept of virginity and purity, and sacrifice in the religion of Christianity. So this gave you another look into the poetry of Tennyson. Now the second poem that I'm going to do with you in today's lecture, with the title The Lotus Eaters, will give you another insight into Tennyson. This is not a religious poem. It's not even a personal poem. There's no lamentation, no talk of personal loss here, no religious fervent here, but you shall see Tennyson embarking on a totally new theme in this poem, and this is the reason I have included it for this lecture. It will give you another taste, and it will introduce to you the kind of variety that Tennyson has brought to his poetry. And this poem is also celebrated, in fact criticized a lot by the later group of critics called the post-colonial critics. In post-colonial criticism, the poem is highly significant because in the Victorian era, in the age of Queen Victoria, the British Empire, Britain was known as the British Empire, with its colonies across the globe. Our own part of the world was a colony of this British Empire. India and Pakistan were then the subcontinent, and if you remember, they were ruled by the British at that time. Also, British Empire formed colonies in Africa and in some other parts of Asia, and in parts of in some of the Caribbean regions. So it was this what we call the imperialism, the imperialist tendency of this British Empire to form colonies. This was highly criticized by the post-colonial writers, by the post-colonial critics, the critics who were writing after the colonial period was over. They criticized this and many other poems in which the natives, the true natives, the true people, the locals of the land were projected as demons, or as half devils, or as half mad, or as half child. So this is another significant theme of this poem, The Lotus Eater. I will discuss this theme towards the end, but before that, let's take a look at the background to the poem, because the poem has also got a background like the previous poem. It is this particular poem is also based upon the Odyssey, written by the great Greek poet Homer. So it is based upon or taken, the idea is taken from the Homer's account of the Odysseus, who is the hero of Odyssey, his journey back to his homeland. So there is a background to the poem which you need to understand before we can actually start with the text of the poem. So the first version of The Lotus Eaters was published by Edward Moxon in London in December 1832, but it was printed with the publication year of 1833. Now, Tennyson based this poem on an episode in the Odyssey. Odyssey is a long epic, and it consists of several episodes. So Tennyson has based his own poem on one episode from the Odyssey, the Homer's great epic poem recounting the harrowing adventures of the Greek hero Odysseus during his sea voyage home after the Trojan War. In his writings, Tennyson refers to Odysseus by his Roman name, Ulysses. Now, Homer had recounted the return of his hero Odysseus. Odysseus took part in the Trojan War, the great battle between the Trojans and the Greeks, which have been retold by the Romans later on, by Virgil, but Homer was the one who wrote it first. So Homer tells us how after his hero, the Greek hero, after the success in the battle, he's now returning to his homeland, Ithaca. And it is on his way back home that they lose their way, and in the sea during sea storms, and they remain lost for almost 9 to 10 days. And when the storm clears, they see themselves near an island, and they decide to take refuge there, or to rest there for a while. So this is the background to the poem. I will elaborate on it more. Let me read it out to you. Now, while on the voyage, Odysseus and his crewmen encountered many perils, including monsters and violent storms, and visited strange lands. In one of these lands lived people who consumed the edible parts of the lotus flower. So Tennyson has based on one account where Odysseus, along with his other crew members, he visits, amongst the other land that they visit, he comes upon this one land or island where the people used to feed upon this flower called lotus, the lotus flower. The lotus flower is locally like the poppy flower that grows in our southern regions, or mostly in Afghanistan. The poppy flower, which is known for its narcotic effects. So these people used to live on this plant. So all the time, and the whole island was in that under the narcotic effect of the lotus flower. After several crewmen ate the lotus, it induced in them a pleasant trance-like state. And when Odysseus and his crew members also stopped at that island, and they were also presented with the lotus flowers, and upon eating the flower, they went into this pleasant state of mind in which all those who consume drugs go into a world of their own. And the lotus eater, in Greek myth, it is this is just a definition for you. But the tone of the lotus eaters is melancholic, but it is objective. The atmosphere is surreal. Surreal means dreamlike, not clear, not real. So it appears, so we can say the atmosphere is surreal. The atmosphere seems to be infectious also, because everyone seems to be getting infected with that trance-like state. The choices of diction, the pictorial effect, the sound of the lines in perfect tune with the mood are all exquisite. It is basically the style of the poem that moves. There's not much in the story that he's telling, that is narrating. In fact, it's a narration. It's a story that Tennyson is telling us of Odysseus and his crew members who find this island, find these strange people on this island, and then become like one of them. So there's nothing really unusual about the story, but it is a style which makes it special. It is a special diction that he employs. It is the pictorial effect that he creates through that diction, and then it is the beauty and the resonance and the rhythm of the lines, the meter in the lines, that creates a beautiful, harmonious effect. The poem can be read as a post-colonial text, as I mentioned to you earlier on, highlighting the civilizing mission of the colonizers in their colonies at the height of the British imperial power. So we shall also, at the end of the poem, read it as a post-colonial text and see how this civilizing mission of the colonizers is discussed here, or is implicit here. And the poem was inspired basically by a trip to Spain and the Pyrenees with Arthur Hallam. And it is upon this trip that Tennyson also composed the other famous poem about this the bird, the great bird, the eagle. Let us now look at the text of the poem. Let's look at the first stanza. He starts with Tennyson starts with Odysseus talking to his crew members. He says, "Courage, "Courage," he said, and pointed toward the land. "This mounting wave will roll us shoreward soon." Up till here the words are in the inverted commas, so these are uttered by Odysseus, and he is asking his crew members to show courage, to show steadfastness, to show hope, because they had been lost in the ocean, in the sea, in violent storms, and they had lost their way back home, and they had lost all hope of even getting home. And in the face of so much troubles, when Odysseus sees this island, he notices this island, he tells his crew members to have faith, he tells them to have courage, he tells them to have hope, because then he points towards the land. He says, the wave, this wave that is carrying our ship, it will soon take us towards that island, and we will soon be able to stop at the island. In the afternoon they came unto a land in which it seemed always afternoon. See, look at the beauty of the language and the strange surreal atmosphere that he creates from the very beginning. He says, in the afternoon they came unto a land in which it seemed always afternoon. They got there in the afternoon, but what is significant is that Tennyson tells us that in that island it was always afternoon. Now why afternoon? Because everything seems to go slow when it is afternoon. The sun is high above in the sky, and everything has this daisy, wavy and hazy kind of look. So and everybody seems to be in a stupor state, and everyone seems to be in daydreaming. So he says it is this place where there is always afternoon. So it is a strange place. And another thing that is significant is that Tennyson wants to tell us that it is on this strange land, time always stands still. So he says it is always afternoon, meaning time doesn't move, time doesn't go forward, time does not change. And even the air, he says, it seems to breathe like a weary dreamer. And this breathing air is described to you in the next lines, when he says, all around the coast the languid air did swoon, breathing like one that hath a weary dream. Full-faced above the valley stood the moon, and like a downward smoke the slender stream along the cliff to fall and pause and fall did seem. Look at the beauty of the language. There is consonance, assonance, alliteration, and all of these words together, they create an effect of unreality, the surreal, the dreamlike effect, and also of time having stopped. He says, all around the coast the languid air. The air is languid, and swoon, both the words are synonymous. It means the lethargic, lazy, dizzy. Swoon is when you are, when you're swooning, you can't stand still. So the languid, the lazy, slow-moving air, it swooned, breathing like one that hath a weary dream. And the air, he says, is personified, and he says the breath of air was like one which had just seen a bad dream, a weary dream, a tired dream. And he's breathing strangely because he's seeing a bad dream. That person is breathing strangely. So he says it is thus that the air on this island is moving. Full-faced above the valley stood the moon. Now it is afternoon, but he says in the afternoon sky the full moon is visible, and like a downward smoke the slender stream among the cliff to fall and pause and fall did seem. Look at the continuous motion. He says the stream is like a downward smoke. The smoke, we know, always goes up. The smoke rises towards the sky. It doesn't come down. But this island is strange, as he tells us. He says everything here is the opposite. Time doesn't pass here, time stops here. The air is languid, the air breathes like someone who has just seen a bad dream. And the moon is visible in the afternoon sky, and it is full. And he tells us the stream is like a smoke going downward. The stream goes down the hill like the smoke, and how does it move? He says it falls and pause and then fall. So even just like the breath of air, just like the breath of air, which is swooning, meaning it is coming, stopping, and then coming. So in the same way, the stream is moving in that same fashion also. It seems to fall, then pause, and then fall. So everything seems to be in that strange kind of state. In the next stanza, he says a land of streams. So he describes this country, he describes this island as a land of streams. He says everywhere we see streams, some like a downward smoke. Again he uses the same simile. Some streams are like the downward smoke, like this smoke going downward, or slow dropping veils of thinnest lawn. Or he says some streams are so thin, are so clear, that he says they are like slow dropping veils of thinnest cloth of lawn. They are so clear, and they are so clear that you can see through them. But he says, how are they moving? He says they're moving like slow dropping veils, like a veil which is slowly dropping, which is slowly falling, the cloth which is slowly falling did go. So the streams also, the water in the stream moved as if it was also drunk, as if it was also intoxicated, as if it was also in some kind of spell. It moved like smoke, meaning as slowly as a smoke, and in a strange manner, like the smoke moves and the smoke rises. And then he says it is the streams are dropping like a piece of cloth slowly uncovers the face. And some through wavering lights and shadows broke, rolling a slumberous sheet of foam below. And he says, and there are some streams who move from light and shadows, maybe from some trees, and pass through trees and caves, rolling a slumberous sheet of foam below. But the other kind, this third kind of stream that he says, it also moves in a slumberous motion, slumbering, meaning half sleep state. So it's also moving with a slumberous sheet of foam below. So the stream seems to move in a mazy, lazy fashion. They saw the gleaming river seaward flow from the inner land. Far off, 3 mountain tops, 3 silent pinnacles of aged snow, stood sunset flushed and dewed with showery drops. Up clomb the shadowy pine above the woven copse. He says they saw the glimmer. Then these people, Odysseus and his crewmen, they also saw the streams falling into the rivers, and then these rivers going down the sea, flowing towards the sea. But then he mentions another beauty of the land. He says there are 3 mountain tops, but he calls them 3 silent pinnacles of aged snow. This gives the impression as if the place was very old, far away from civilization, far away from civilized world. Nothing seems to have changed here. Everything from the prehistoric times have appeared to have remained the same. So these were silent reminders of history. The hills stood sunset flushed, and now the sun had gone down, gone behind their backs, so their tips were glowing red in the setting sun. And dewed with showery drops, up clomb the shadowy pine above the woven cobs. And he says, they were flushed, they were dewed with the showery drops, they were shining with the drops on them. Upclomb the shadowy pine, the drops were shining from the pine on the pine trees above the woven copse. Copse is the land, he's talking about the earth. So he says the pine that grew over the earth on the mountain slopes. Even the pines were shining under this setting moonlight because of the drops that they carried. In the next stanza he says, the charmed sunset lingered low adown in the red west. Through mountain clefts the dale was seen far inland, and the yellow down bordered with palm, and many a winding vale and meadow set with slender galingale. He's just describing to you the island here. He says that sunset was charmed. The sunset now is also charmed. The sunset is also under the same effect. It is also drugged. It is also under the effect of the lotus plants. It's also under some kind of a spell or under some kind of a charm. It lingered low down. It was lingering a while. It was taking its time to pass out in the red west. Through mountain clefts the dale was seen, he says, and as far as they could see, they could, through the gaps in the mountains, clefts are the gaps in the mountains, through the gaps in the mountains they could see the other valleys. The dales are the valleys. They could see the inner land, and they could see further or other valleys beyond the mountains, and the yellow down bordered with palm, and they could see the yellow fields which were all bordered with palm tree, and many a winding vale or valleys, and there were many winding valleys in that island, and meadows are long grassy pastures, grazing pastures, green grazing pastures for the flock, set with slender galingale. And these meadows, they were surrounded with slender galingale. Galingale is a plant with the family of ginger, and you know ginger has also got strong aroma, so it's also contains the aromatic qualities. So the whole island seems to have plants and flowers that have these have special kind of aroma that induces sleep and has a special narcotic effect. A land where all things always seemed the same, and round about the keel with faces pale, dark faces pale against that rosy flame, the mild-eyed melancholy lotus eaters came. These lines are very significant. They give you the description of the locals, the inhabitants of this island, and it is these lines that are significant as far as the post-colonial critics are concerned, because it is here that these people are shown in a negative light. Tennyson tells us that this was a strange land. It was a land where time seemed to have stopped, where all things seemed always the same. They were far removed from the civilized world, far removed from the European civilized world, where the European countries had made so much progress. They had moved on from the Industrial Revolution was at its peak in the European cities, and things were far different and far removed in their own part of the world than in these other parts of the world, which for them were uncivilized, uncouth, and demon-like and animal-like and lowly and inferior. Because then he says, and round about the keel with faces pale. So these when the ship reached the harbor, the beach of the land, these people came to them, and dark faces pale against that rosy flame. Rosy flame is the red light of the setting sun. So their faces appeared pale, but they were dark colored. The mild-eyed melancholy lotus eaters came. So there was this lost and melancholy look in their eyes. So they had this strange, sad light in their eyes because they were living a life with no life. Their life was like death. Then in the next stanza, Tennyson says, branches they bore of that enchanted stem, laden with flower and fruit, whereof they gave to each, but whoso did receive of them and taste, to him the gushing of the wave. Now in this stanza, all the mariners, they change because they eat the lotus now, and they forget who they were, where they came from, and where they were going. So these people, they carry the branches, those enchanted stem of the lotus plant, and the stem carry the flower and the fruit also, and they gave each stem to each mariner, and whoever took it and tasted it, because naturally they must be hungry, to him, Tennyson tells us, the gushing of the wave far, far away did seem to moan and rave on alien shores. The first effect was that the sound of the waves upon the seas, it seemed to come to them from far, far away. Right away they went into that strange kind of a state of mind. Normally, I don't have an experience of drugs, but that is what we hear, that once you take those drugs, you go into that hyper state of mind, or in that elevated state of mind where everything changes for you. So for these people, when they take that, eat that fruit and flower, they enter into another state of mind where some sounds seem to come to them from far, far away. So the sound of the waves seemed to come to them from far, far away. And it even did not seem happy to them. It seemed to be a mournful sound to them and rave on alien shores. So it appeared alien to them and it appeared mournful to them. So all of a sudden their world changed, their worldview changed. And if his fellow spake, his voice was thin as voices from the grave. And now after the waves, Tennyson tells us, if one of them spoke, if one mariner spoke to the other mariner, their voice seemed to come to them in a thin quality, in a thin voice, as if it was coming from the grave. So they didn't even hear each other properly. The sound seemed to come to them from a great distance, as if it was coming out of the grave. It had that strange echoing quality about it. And deep asleep he seemed, yet all awake. And they seemed to be in deep sleep, but Tennyson tells us actually they were awake. And music in his ears his beating heart did make. And their own heart, their own beating of the heart appeared to them as sweet music. So they were oblivious of all the natural world around them, of each other, of their purpose, of the sounds and the sights of the natural world around them, and they could only hear the music of their own beating of the heart. And the next stanza says that they sat them down upon the yellow sand, between the sun and moon and upon the shore. And sweet it was to dream of fatherland, of child and wife and slave. So these natives, what did they do? The locals, they made them sit upon the yellow sand. The sand was also yellowing because the sun was setting. Between the sun and the moon, look at the strange, surreal, dreamlike atmosphere that's created. It's a really strange atmosphere because the sun and the moon are at the same time in the sky. And they are visible right above the shore together. And sweet it was to dream of fatherland, of child and wife and slave. So they lay down on the beach, on the sand beaches. They did not want to move. They only wanted to imagine beautiful things. They wanted to imagine beautiful and things that were their heart's desire. They had been lost in the oceans for a long time, and they had wanted to reach to their own homeland. So this is what they dream about. They dream of their fatherland. Look at the word fatherland. It is not motherland. It is the fatherland, the patriarchal association with land. Of child, they dreamt of their own children, of their wives and slaves. This is yet again the post-colonial interpretation that we will have of these lines at the end. But evermore most weary seemed the sea, weary the oar, weary the wandering fields of barren foam. Look at the repetition of the words weary 3 times. He says, but so dreaming seemed good thing to do, but doing something seemed hard. So he says, weary seemed the sea. The sea seemed weary because it took felt like a great effort to go back upon their ships and to shake up their journey again on the sea. So it was weary the oar. They were tired of, tired even to think about putting out their oars and taking their ship away from this land, and weary the wandering fields of barren foam. And they even felt tired to these fields of barren foam. These are the he's talking about the route in the sea, the passage in the sea. So even going back home, trying to find a way back home, seemed a weary thing to do. Although they yearned to be back in home, they were dreaming to be back with their wives and children and being served with slaves. But in this state of mind, under the effect of that narcotic effects of those plants, they could only dream, and doing anything practically was almost impossible. Then someone said, "We will return no more." And all at once they sang, "Our island home is far beyond the wave, we will no longer roam." So this is a strange ending that Tennyson gives us. These people decide that this is their homeland. They say, "We will not return. We will return no more." This island becomes their home, and they will no longer roam the seas for their other homeland. This is their rightful home. So this strange dreamlike poem ends here, and with lots of strange images and with the stark pictorial quality. The poem is highly significant and is extremely important. But let us analyze the poem now, and let us look at the different themes. First of all, the poem describes the human condition, and its interest centers in the conflict between the sense of responsibility and the desire to take pleasure. So generally we can say that Tennyson is giving us a picture of the human condition, that our desire is to shirk responsibility, not to take responsibility, and only to spend time in pleasure seeking activities, like these people on the shores. They know it is important that they get back to their homeland, and they want to, but what happens? They shirk from responsibility. They refuse to do that, and they are lost in that pleasure seeking activity. So one is that general meaning of the poem. Secondly, it paints the Victorian passion for progress and colonization in far-off land. This is more significant aspect of the poem. It shows Victorian imperialism, the European imperialism at its height in the 19th century, where the European powers were discovering the far-off lands, and upon discovering them, they found them uncivilized, uncouth, wild, their religions degraded, their moral values lowly and inferior. So for them, those people and those lands, they needed to be civilized. So the Western imperialist power took upon themselves to civilize the natives in those lands. So it is this civilizing mission, it is this passion for progress, to spread it in all parts of the world. This is what is the main theme of the poem. And as we saw, that nature is also shown as indolent and sluggish. Everything in that island moves slowly, sluggishly. The place seems to create a feeling of aversion for active life. And yet there is charm in the glow of sunlight. It is this ambivalence that Tennyson shows through his poem, that the island is basically a reflection of inactivity, of aversion for active life. Yet these people, representing the colonizers, representing the Western imperialism, when they come to this land, they are attracted. They find charm in the glowing sunset. They're charmed by the place. It is this ambivalent attitude of the British towards their colonies and the colonizers which is reflected here. It was not Tennyson's aims. Tennyson was definitely celebrating the British imperialists' objectives here. But it comes out that the poem also reflects how, this ambivalent attitude of the British can be traced in the poem. As we see that they are at the same time attracted towards this land, but also repelled by its land. So it is a mixture of both, this is what we call ambivalence. It's a mixture of love and hate. It was this relationship of love and hate that made the British make colonies of the rest of the world. They hated the locals, they hated their morals, they hated their religions, they hated their living standards, their living life, they hated their language. They did not sympathize with any that was foreign to them and that was native. Yet they were attracted to those colonies, to those places, because it held so much for them. It held so much profit for them. It is a land where nothing seems to change. The inhabitants are dull-faced, hinting at the lack of progress and backwardness of the locals. So the same theme of colonizers is taken further. For those colonizers, for British imperialists, these colonies gave a look of backwardness. These were backward people, and where they had been in that state of uncivilized, in that uncivilized state for a long time now, and nothing in their life seemed to have changed. They seemed not to have progressed. So this was how these colonizers saw those locals in the colonies. The opening word courage also hints at the laborious task of the Europeans that they have taken upon themselves, that is, to civilize the colonizers. So even the opening word resonates with the imperial conviction, that is the command to have courage, to be brave enough to take upon this responsibility of civilizing the people in the colonies. And the reference also to the fatherland in the stanza 4, it shows that this colonial power is patriarchal in nature. Patriarchal is the power, patriarchy shows the power of the male dominance, and it shows a male dominant society. And in most literature, the colonial powers, the imperial power is represented through patriarchy, and the locals are represented, the colonized or the locals are represented with the maternal, with the feminine power. So it is this patriarchal role of the colonizers with respect to the locals that seems to have been shown here. By appropriate imagery and subtle use of significant words, the poet has been successful in creating an atmosphere of drowsiness and languor. We have to give him credit. Tennyson, because of his superb imagery and his really exquisite language, choice of diction, he's able to create an atmosphere of total drowsiness. Reread the poem for yourself and you will feel the strange quality that is so powerful in the poem. And the landscape is obviously also unreal and imaginary, but the details of the scenery are taken from things seen in the Pyrenees. This land, this picture is maybe resonance of the visit to the Pyrenees, but also as Spain is near the Northern Africa, so we can imagine Tennyson talking about these natives that he saw from Northern Africa. So with this we come to the end of the second poem by Alfred Tennyson, The Lotus Eaters, and I will conclude here my discussion regarding the poet, because in the next lecture I will start with another Victorian poet. So this is all about Alfred Tennyson, and I shall see you again in the next lecture. Thank you.